Hey there, how's it going everybody? In this video, we're going to learn how to deploy our Django application using Heroku so that anyone with internet access can use it within a browser. So far we've created this application with some good functionality, but the site still only lives on our local machine. So right now I have this running in my browser on my local machine, but no one else can access this. So the point of building these sites and applications is to deploy them so that they're accessible over the internet. So in this video, we're going to use Heroku to deploy our application. Now, if you don't know what Heroku is, it's a platform that allows us to easily deploy and host applications without going through the headache of setting up everything on our own manually. So if you watched my video on how to deploy to a Linux server, then you would have noticed that that took a lot of time and also requires you to be familiar with a little bit of system administration and things like that in order to get your application up and running. Heroku abstracts a lot of that away and allows us to get our application deployed more easily without needing to set up our own web servers and firewalls and stuff like that. And they also have a free tier that you can use so that you can actually get your application deployed without paying any money. And then if you need to add any features that aren't included for free, then you can simply scale up however you need. Now, one thing that I should mention about Heroku is that they don't have a normal file system like we're used to. It will hold our static files and things like that, but if we store a bunch of images or user uploads, then those are actually going to be deleted. So if you're saving images or files from your users, then you'll need to use a service through something like Amazon Web Services in S3 buckets. So if you're following along with this series, then we already saw how to get that set up in our last video. Okay, so with that said, let's go ahead and get started. So first, you're going to need to create a Heroku account. This is pretty straightforward. You're just going to want to go to their website and create an account just like you would on any other site. So I've already gone and signed up for an account through them, but if you haven't, then you can just go to sign up and fill in all your information and just register like you would with any other site. Now, once you've created an account, we also have a few prerequisites that we need to set up. So first, we're going to need to use Git version control. Now, using Git and version control is considered a best practice by just about any programmer out there. So I think it's great that this is how Heroku does its deployments because it basically steers you towards best practices. So installing Git is also very straightforward. So I'll open up the Git download page here. Now, most of you likely already have Git installed, so I'm not going to go into that here. But if for some reason you don't have Git installed, then I'll leave a link in the description section below to this download page that I have pulled up here so that you can download Git for whichever operating system you are using. Now, another thing that you're going to want to do once you have a Heroku account is you're going to want to install the Heroku command line interface, which is the Heroku CLI for short. The Heroku CLI is going to allow us to deploy our application from our command line using some Heroku specific commands. So this page that I have open here will give you instructions for how to download this for Mac, Windows, or Linux. And again, I'll have a link to this page in the description section below as well so that you can download the CLI for whichever operating system you're using. I'm on a Mac, so that's the option that I chose, but I've already downloaded and installed this. And once you have that CLI installed, let's open up our command line and see if that worked. So I'm going to open up my command line here, and you're just going to test this by simply typing in Heroku. So I'll type in Heroku and run that. And if our installation of the Heroku CLI worked, then it should list out a list of commands that we can use to interact with our account. Now, the first thing that we'll need to do is log in through the command line so that we're validated to run these commands on our account. So to do this, I'm just going to scroll down. Actually, I'll just clear my page here. By the way, by typing in Heroku, you can see all of the commands that we can use here, but I will clear the page. Now, to log in, I'm going to say Heroku login, and I'll run that. And you can see it says press any key to open up the browser to log in or press Q to exit. So I'm going to press any key and it's going to open up a browser and ask me to log in to Heroku. So from here, you can log into your Heroku account. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Okay, so now it says we're logged in and that we can close this page and return to our CLI and that it should now be logged in. So now I should be authenticated. So once you're authenticated, then we can continue with our deployment. So there are a few things that we want to do within our project before we deploy. So I'm going to pull back up my terminal here. And I've already navigated to my project directory, and you're going to want to do the same. Mine is located on my desktop and it's called Django Project, but you can navigate to wherever yours is located. And once you're navigated to your project, then we're going to want to create a requirements.txt file. Now, if you haven't created a requirements.txt file, basically it is a file that holds all of the dependencies that we're using in our application. Now, I'm using a virtual environment, so all of my packages are specific to this project. But if you aren't using a virtual environment, then I'll link to the requirements.txt file that my app produces, and I'll link to those in the description section below. Now, you likely don't want to just use your system's Python dependencies because it could contain a lot of packages that aren't specific to your project, and all of these are going to get installed on Heroku, so it's best to keep it exclusive to what's actually needed for our application. So first, before we create our requirements.txt file of our dependencies, let's pip install one more package that we're going to use when our application is deployed, and that is gunicorn. So I'm going to install that by saying pip install gunicorn. So we will install that. And once we have that installed, now we want to create our requirements.txt file. Now, the requirements file is also how Heroku knows that it's a Python application. If you're using a setup.py file or a pip file, then you can use those instead, and it'll also recognize it as a Python application. Okay, so now to make this requirements.txt file, we can simply say, let me clear this and first do something called a pip freeze. If I run pip freeze, then we can see that this lists out all of the pip installations that we have currently made. And these are what we want to add to a requirements.txt file. So if you're on Windows, then you can just create a requirements.txt file in your project and copy all of those, copy all of the output from pip freeze, and just paste that into a requirements.txt file. If you are on Mac or Linux or using Bash, then we can simply say pip freeze, and we can just pipe that into a requirements.txt file, and that'll create that file for us with the output of that pip freeze command. Okay, so now we should have that requirements.txt file in our project folder that has the output from that pip freeze command. Okay, so another thing that we need to do here is to use Git within our application. So some of you may have already been using Git for this, but if not, then I'll run through these steps real quick. So it's extremely easy to do. We just have to simply run the command git init to initialize an empty Git repository. So we ran that, and we can see it says initialize empty Git repository in our project folder. So now we're using Git version control within our application. It's actually that easy. In this video, we're going to be using very simple Git commands, so you don't need to be extremely comfortable with using Git in the command line. But if you'd like to see an in-depth explanation and walkthrough of how to use Git, then I do have a detailed video on that as well, and I'll leave a link to that in the description section below if anyone is interested. Okay, so now we're ready to tell Git what files we want to actually track. There are usually going to be certain files that we don't want Git to track. So for example, anything that is specific to my machine or something like that, we're going to want to ignore that. Now, one resource that I use a lot for this is from GitHub itself, and it's a template of commonly ignored files for Python programs. And I actually have that open here in my browser. Let me close down this page and open this up. So this is the Python git ignore file here, and we can see that it ignores files like PYC files and logs and stuff like that. That kind of stuff you likely don't want to track with Git. It also has a Django section. If I scroll down here a bit, we can see it has a Django section here. Now we can see it ignores our db.sqlite file as well. And that is our SQLite database. And that's fine because we're actually not going to be using SQLite for our production database. In development, we've been using SQLite, but for production, we're going to set up a new Postgres database. Postgres is the database of choice for a lot of different websites because of its features and performance. So that's what we're going to be using. And it's also what Heroku recommends in its walkthroughs. So I'm actually going to copy this template git ignore file from GitHub and use that as a starting point for my git ignore file. Now, one tip is that if you're ever copying something from GitHub, then you can just click on this raw link here towards the top right of the page, and it will take you to just the text of the file so that it's easier to copy and paste. So this is all of the text of that gitignore file. So I'm going to just highlight all of that and copy. And now I'm going to go back to my project. And in my project, I'm going to create a gitignore file. So I'm going to go to new file, and this is actually going to be a dot file. So it is .gitignore. So don't forget the dot before gitignore. So I'm going to create that and open that up. And now I'm going to paste in what we got from GitHub and then scroll up here to the top. So we can see that it is ignoring a lot of these different files. We have some unit test files in here and things like that. So that's good. Now at the top of mine, I'm also going to add something that gets added on Macs sometimes. If you're on Windows, then you don't have to do this. But at the top, I'm also going to add a section for Mac. And I'm going to add a file here that is .ds_store. And that's just an annoying file that gets created on Mac sometimes that we don't want to commit with our project as well. So I'm going to add that to the gitignore file. Okay, so now that we have our gitignore file, let's go back to the command line and commit all of our changes so far. So I'm going to open up our terminal here. And to do this, we can simply say git add with a -A, and that's going to add all of the changes that we have so far. So I'll run that. And now if I do a git status, then we can see that we have all of these new files. Now, the reason our entire project is saying that it's new files is because we just initialized our Git repository. So all of these files are new to Git. None of them have been committed yet. So now let's commit them to Git. So I can say git commit, and then we can do a -M here to set a message for this commit. And I'm just going to say initial commit and run that. Okay, so now we've committed these files to Git locally. So now that we've committed these locally, let's create an Heroku app where we can push this code. So to do this, we can simply use the Heroku command. So let me clear the screen here. So I can say, Heroku, sorry about that, Heroku, create, and now the name of our app. So I'll just call mine My Awesome App and run that. Well, and it looks like My Awesome App is already taken as a name for a Heroku app. So instead, this might take some trial and error, but let's see here. I'll call this My Django app and try to create that. That's already taken as well. Okay, how about this? We'll do My Awesome Django app. I doubt that is taken. Okay, so that one worked. Okay, so when that app is created, it's actually going to create a domain for us as well. And I can see that domain in the output of that create command. You can either copy and paste that into your browser, or you can simply run Heroku open to open that in your browser. So this is the URL here. You can copy and paste that into a browser, or let me clear my screen here, or I can just say Heroku open, and it will automatically open that URL in my browser. So we can see here that our site is currently working, but it's just using the default Heroku site for now. Now, if that Heroku open command didn't work for you, and it says that you're missing a require flag to specify what app you want to open, then it's likely because you're not in your project's directory within your command line, or possibly you did some of these steps out of order. So for example, if you create an app in a directory that isn't tracked by Git, then it might give you some issues and require you to set that stuff up in a different way. But if you did everything in the order that we covered in this video, then this should be working for you. So we can see here that it gave us a domain of myawesomedjangoapp.herokuapp.com, and we currently have Heroku's default site. So we haven't actually deployed anything yet. So now let's go ahead and do that. So let's push our code to Heroku. So if we go back to our command line, then we can push that by saying git push Heroku master. So if we run that, then this is going to start pushing our code up to Heroku. So we can see that it's going to do a lot of different things here. So it's saying that a Python app is detected, that it's installing Python, installing pip, and all of these different things. So let's run through this installation here. Okay, so if you just have a simple Python application, then that might have worked for you and pushed that up to Heroku. Now ours didn't work because our application is a bit more complex and it ran into an issue while it was deploying. Now the good part is that if it runs into an error like this, then your app just doesn't get deployed. So it won't break your website if it runs into errors at this deployment section here. So if we scroll up here a little bit, then we should see a detailed traceback of exactly what went wrong. Now my text is a bit larger here so that you all can see. So this is going to be a bit bunched together, but I'll see if I can find the part where it ran into an error. So we can see that the error happened when it ran this command, python manage.py collect static. Now, if that's not obvious from this section here, if I scroll down a little bit here, then we can see that it gives a note here, error while running, python manage.py collect static. So what that command does is it collects our static files so that they can be served up in production. So if you've been following along with this series, then you might remember that at one point I mentioned that those static files would be handled differently in production. So that's what this is. So that's a command that Heroku runs for us so that it can automate that process. But if I scroll down a bit to see what went wrong with that command, or scroll up a little bit, then we can see that it says here, you're using the static files app without having set the static root setting to a file system path. So that's telling us that we don't have this static root variable set to where our static files will be located on the file system. So let's go ahead and set that in our settings. So I'm going to open up our project here. I'm going to close the gitignore file. And now let me open the settings.py file. And once we have that open, I'm going to scroll down to the very bottom here. And let me turn off the word wrap so that we can see this a bit better. Now I'm going to scroll up to where we have our static URL. Okay, so now let's set our static root. Now the location that Heroku will put these static files for us when they run that command is going to be in a directory called static files. So we will say, and let me actually copy this media root because this is going to be very similar, but instead of media root, this is going to be static root. And the location that Heroku is going to put these files is going to be called static files. So I will put that there and save that. Okay, so earlier our deployment failed because we didn't have the static root set. So now we can try to commit our updates and deploy this again. Now I'm going to tell you right now that it's still not going to work, but the reason I'm showing you one step at a time like this is so that we can see the justification for each step instead of just plowing through all of the changes that we need to make. Seeing it one step at a time like this might help you debug an application in the future if you have an application that is different from what we've created here. So let's commit these updates and try to redeploy. So I'm going to open back up the command line here and let me clear my screen. And now let's commit these updates and redeploy. So first, if we want to see what we changed, I can say git status, and we can see that we modified our settings.py file. And to add that to the files that we want to commit, we can simply say git add-a to add all of the modified files. And now we can commit that. So I'll say git commit -m for a message, and I'll just say updated static root, and I will commit that. Okay, so now we have committed that locally. Now let's actually push that up to Heroku and try to deploy that. So I'm going to say git push Heroku master. So if I run that, then it's going to run through and try to deploy this again. Okay, so it looks like our deployment was successful and we don't have any errors when we tried to push our code, so that's good. But now let's try to open our application in the browser. And again, if I clear my screen, we can do that with Heroku open. So I'll run Heroku open to open our application in the browser. And now let me make this a little larger here so that you all can read it. So now it's telling us that we're getting an application error. So this is different than getting an error during deployment. So it gives us a hint here. It says that if we're the owner of this application, then we can run this command, Heroku logs -- tail. That command will allow us to see the latest logs of our application. So I'm going to copy that command, and let's go back to our terminal and run that. So I'll pull up the terminal and I will paste that in, Heroku logs -- tail. Now, if you look through these logs, then we can actually find a lot of interesting things. And you can actually use the logging module from the Python standard library to log out different things wherever you want. So if you want these logs to be even more detailed, then you can use that. But what we want to look at here is the error that we're getting. So we can see that the error that we're getting is right here at the bottom, and it's running on two different lines here, but we can see that the description of this error says that there are no web processes running. So what's going on here is that we haven't told Heroku how we want to run our application. So in order to do this, we're going to need to create something called a proc file. So I'm going to create this and explain along the way. So in the root of our project directory, I'm going to create that proc file. So within our project directory, I'm going to say new file, and this is going to be called proc file. So that's an uppercase P and then lowercase for the rest. And that's PROCFILE. So this proc file is going to be a simple text file. Now, even though it's a text file, be sure you don't create the file with a .txt extension. It should not have an extension. So I'm going to create that file and then open that up. Now within this file, we're going to create that web process that our logs said wasn't running. So to do this, we can simply say, and I'm going to type this all out and then explain it later. So I'll say web g unicorn, make sure I spelled that right, g unicorn, and then Django underscore project.wsgi. Okay, so now let's look this over piece by piece. So web is the process type. The name web is important here. It declares that this process type will receive web traffic when deployed. Now, gunicorn is the command needed to run our web process. If you don't know what that is, it's basically a way for our Python code to talk to the web server. And it's going to do that through our WSGI file. So WSGI stands for Web Service Gateway Interface. So gunicorn is the command, and then we're specifying the location to the WSGI file in our application after that. So Django project is my package, and you'll want to have that be whatever your project directory is called. So this right here should be the name, the same name as the directory that holds your settings.py file. So if you called that, my awesome app or something like that, then you want to put that here. I called mine Django project. And after we specify that package, then we want to specify our WSGI file. Now, we didn't make any changes to that WSGI file in this series, but that file has a variable called application, and gunicorn will use that to run our application for us. Okay, so that's going to do it for our proc file. Now, these files can contain additional process types. So for example, you might declare one for a background worker process that processes items off a queue or something like that. But in this video, we're only going to do the web process. So I've saved that file. And now let's commit those changes and see what we get in the browser. And again, I can tell you that this still isn't going to work, but we'll go step by step. So I'm going to reopen our terminal here, and I'll press Control-C to quit those logs. And now we can commit our changes. So again, if we want to see what changes we've made, we can do a get status, and we can see that we have a new file here, proc file. So I'll add that and say get add-a to add all of our changes. And now do a commit. So get commit with a message of added proc file. And now I'll clear the screen. Now let's push this up to Heroku. So I'll say get push Heroku master and run that. Okay, so now we've pushed those changes up to Heroku. Now you might have noticed that your push to Heroku was faster there than it was before, and that's because Heroku will see that we've already installed all of the dependencies from the requirements file before, and that there aren't any new ones. So it'll just skip that step. So that's a nice feature of Heroku. Okay, so now let's open up our application in the browser again. And again, we can do that with just Heroku open. So I'll run that and open this up. Okay, so now we can see that we're getting a different looking error here. Now you might recognize that this is actually the Django debug error screen. So we have made some progress. This is actually now using Django. Now, one thing that should worry us here is that it's showing us so much information on this debug screen, and that's why we should definitely turn off debug mode when working in production. People could use this information to find vulnerabilities in our application, and we definitely don't want that. But while we have the debug output here, we may as well see what it says. So at the very top here, it says invalid HTTP host header with this domain name here. And then it says you may need to add this to our allowed hosts. So since this is now deployed, Django has some built-in security features where we need to explicitly specify the host that we're going to allow for our application. And we're going to make this change in our settings.py file. So I'm just going to copy that host that it says that we need to add. So that is right here. Mine is myawesomedjangoapp.herokuapp.com. I'll copy that. And now I'm going to add that to our settings.py file. So I'm going to open up our application, go back to our settings.py file and scroll up here to the top. And if we scroll down a little bit, we can see that we have this allowed hosts section here. So I'm going to paste that in as a string. So myawesomedjangoapp.herokuapp.com. Now we can also see here in our settings that we have debug equal to true. Now, like I said before, we're going to want to set debug equal to false in production, but we shouldn't just set it equal to false because when we're on our local machine, we actually want debug equal to true for testing. So anytime you need a value that's specific to whichever machine you're on, that is a good candidate for an environment variable. So if you've been following along with this entire series, then you should already have some experience setting environment variables, since that's where we put our username and password for our email service and also our credentials for AWS S3. But if you don't know how to set environment variables, then I actually have a separate video on how to do that for your operating system. So I'll leave a link to that video in the description section below if you need to give that a watch. So I'm actually going to set a debug environment variable here so that can be different for our local machine and Heroku. Now, while we're setting environment variables, we should also move our secret key to an environment variable while we're at it. So the secret key shouldn't be something that we put in our code potentially for other people to see. So I'm going to create an environment variable for the secret key as well. And I'm actually going to create a new secret key for our application since we've been using the current one for development. So the new one that we create will be for production. Now, there are a bunch of ways that we can generate a new secret key, but the way that I like to do this is from the Python interpreter. So I'm just going to open up my command line here and I'm going to run Python. So I'm going to use Python here to generate a random key, and you actually have to be running Python 3 in order to use this module. So I'm going to do this using a module called secrets, and that is included in the Python 3 standard library. So I'm going to say import secrets and run that, and that imported. And now I'm going to use a method called token hex to generate this. And the more bytes that you pass in to that method, the longer the random value will be. So I'll say secrets.token_hex, and I'll just pass in a 24 for the bytes there. And we can see that it generates this really long random string. And that's about as long as our current secret key. So I'm going to copy that and I'm going to add that to my environment variables. Now, since I'm on a Mac, I can put these in my .bash_profile file. But like I said, if you're on a different operating system and don't know how to create environment variables for your operating system, then you can watch that other video that I mentioned just a bit ago that's linked in the description section below. So I'm going to open my bash profile here. So I'm going to exit out of the Python interpreter and open up my bash profile file in my home directory. Now, I used a Sublime command to open this up, but if you don't have that Sublime command set up on your system, then you can just open that in whatever editor of your choice. Once we have that open, let me turn off word wrap here so that we can read this a little better. Once we have that open, I'm going to set this secret key under this section here where we have our Django blog variables. And you can see that we already have some environment variables here that we set for AWS in the last video. Okay, so to set this secret key, I'm just going to say export secret underscore key, set that equal to that string that we just generated. And now I'm also going to create an environment variable for our debug value. So I'm going to say export debug underscore value, and I'm going to set that equal to true. Since we're on our local machine, we want that debug value equal to true so that we can test our site. Now on Heroku, we're going to set that environment variable equal to false, since that'll be our production version. Now also notice here that our environment variable is a string of true and not just a simple Boolean like we would see in Python. And we'll see why that's important in just a second, but we'll ignore it for now. Okay, so now I have my environment variables set for my local machine. So now let's set our environment variables for Heroku. So let me save that before we exit out of it. And I'm going to pull up my terminal to set these Heroku environment variables. So I'm still within my project here within the command line. Now to add these environment variables to Heroku, we can simply say Heroku config :set, and now we can set our environment variables. So first I'm going to set a secret key, and actually just to make sure I don't mess up any of the spelling here, whoops, let me go back to our bash profile, and I'm just going to grab these from here and whoops, copy those back into our terminal. So Heroku config set, and I will set that secret key equal to that value. And now I'll also say Heroku config :set, go back to our environment variables here and set this debug value equal to true. And if you've been following along with this series, then you also need to set a few more environment variables. So these will be the username and password for the email service that you set up in the reset password video, and also the AWS credentials that we set up in the AWS S3 video. So first I'll do the AWS credentials since we already have those pulled up here. So I'm going to copy this access key ID. Again, let me just rerun that Heroku config set, and I will set that to the AWS access key ID that we used. And again, let me now do Heroku config set and set this equal to our AWS secret access key. Okay. And lastly, let me do Heroku config set this equal to our AWS storage bucket name, and paste that in. Got that set. And now I'm going to do my email user and password for the email service. So I'm going to say Heroku config set, and first that was email underscore user, and my email user is equal to CoreyMSchaefer@gmail.com. And for the password, that was email underscore pass. Now, I'm not actually going to put my email password here for obvious reasons. I don't want to broadcast that to everyone in a video, but I'm going to pause the video and put in my password here in an environment variable to get the emails to work. And then I will pick up the video after I have put that in. Okay, so I paused the video and put in that email password as an environment variable, and now picked it back up. So now that we have all of those environment variables set, now let's update our settings.py file to use those environment variables that we just set. So I'm going to go back to Sublime and open up our settings.py file. So for our secret key here, I'm just going to comment out the old secret key. And now I'll set a new one here. So I'll say secret key is equal to, and to grab an environment variable, we can say os.environ.get and we can get that environment variable, and we just called that secret key as the environment variable as well, so we can just grab that. Now for our debug value, I'm going to leave this set to true just for a bit longer until we get this deployed, and once it's working, then I'll set it equal to false once everything is working properly. Okay, so we've made some changes to our settings. So now let's commit our changes and put those up to Heroku and see what we get. So I'm going to go back to the command line here, and instead of running get status, I'm just going to go ahead and add these. You can run get status if you want to see what you've changed, but I'll just add all of our changes. And now I'll say git commit -m for the message, and we can say updated settings. And now let's push that to Heroku. So git push Heroku master, and I'll run that. Okay, so once we have that deployed, let's take a look at our site. So I'm going to say Heroku open to open that up in the browser. Okay, so we're still getting an error. This time the error says no such table blog post. Okay, so remember, we didn't push our SQLite database that we've been using in deployment because we're going to use Postgres in production. So this is a little expected since we haven't created any tables in a Postgres database yet. So first of all, we're going to need Postgres installed on our machine to get this working. So let me pull up Heroku's documentation on this. I think I have this pulled up over here. Okay. And again, I'll have a link to all of these resources in the description section below so that you don't have to look around for this stuff. So we can see that they give instructions for how to install Postgres for different operating systems. So we have it to set up for Mac and for Windows and for Linux. Now, I already went through the installation for Mac, so you don't have to watch me do that, but it's pretty straightforward. Just follow what they have listed step by step. So once you have Postgres installed on your machine, we're going to want to create a Postgres database on Heroku. Now, it's possible that Heroku already created a database for us. It does this for certain applications that have certain libraries. So we can check that if I go back to the command line. If I say Heroku add-ons and run that, then we can see that we have a database for our app already. But if you do need to create a database, then instead, if it didn't create one for you, then you could say Heroku add-ons :create, and then Heroku -PostgreSQL, let me spell it correctly, and then : and then you can put in the plan of database that you want. The free version is hobby-dev. So if you don't have a database already, then you can run that. Now, I'm not going to run that since it already has a database for me here. Now, like I said, that hobby dev part is the plan, and that is the free tier. But if you ever need any more performance, then you can always bump that up. And we can see more about that if we were to run Heroku PG. We can see there it shows us a bit more about that database. So we can see that it has, for the rows, 0 out of 10,000. So the free tier does have a 10,000 row limit. Okay, so now that we have a Postgres database, now we actually need to create tables for it. So we also need to create a super user where we can log in to our Django admin site. So first things first, we need to add the credentials to our settings.py file so that our Django application can talk to the database. Now, instead of doing this manually, we're going to use a helper function that Heroku provides for us to do this. And we can get that by running a pip install. So here within our command line, I'm going to do an installation of pip install Django-Heroku. So I'll run that. So that Django Heroku package is going to automatically configure our database URL and will also take care of connecting our static assets to gUnicorn using a package called white noise. So it's going to set up some stuff for logging and things like that too. I think this will even take care of a couple of things we already set up, like our secret key and allowed host, but I like setting those myself since I'm already in there anyways. Okay, so the way that we get this to work is to open up our settings.py file. So let me open that up here. And at the top of our file, we want to import that module. So I'm going to import Django underscore Heroku. Now, I know that we installed that as Django dash Heroku, but when we import it, it's Django underscore Heroku. Now, at the very bottom of our settings file, so let me scroll all the way to the bottom. At the very bottom, we're going to say Django Heroku dot settings, and we are going to pass in locals, and these need parentheses here at the end. So like I said, just by adding that in, that's going to automatically set a lot of those configurations for us. Okay, so now let's deploy this. Now, one thing that you don't want to forget to do is update your requirements.txt file. So we've pip installed some packages, so we want to make sure Heroku gets those changes. So I'm going to grab those pip freeze dependencies again and update my requirements.txt file. So to do this on Mac, I can simply say pip freeze and pipe those in to requirements.txt. And again, if you're on Windows, then you can just paste that pip freeze output into your requirements.txt file instead. Okay, so again, if you want to see the changes, you can run a git status. Now mine says that I've modified my settings.py and that I haven't modified my requirements.txt file. And I think that's just because I already had that one Django Heroku module installed already. So that was already in that file. Okay, so now to add those, I'll say git add -a. And now I can commit those changes locally. So git commit -m with a message here. In the message, I'll just say added Django Heroku. And now I can push those changes to Heroku. So I'll say git push Heroku master and let that run through the deployment again. Okay, so that deployment is complete. Now, I promise to y'all that we are about to have our application working, but if we check it now, then it should still give us some errors. So let's see what those are. So I'll say Heroku open and open up our page in the browser again. And again, it says relation blog post does not exist. Okay, so we're still getting an error that our tables don't exist, but we should be able to talk to the database now with Django. So now we just need to run the commands that create the tables. And while we're at it, we'll also create a super user that has admin access. Now, if you remember from the database video earlier in this series, we can create our tables by running the manage.py migrate command. We shouldn't need to run make migrations because the migrations we already had should have been pushed up with our application. So we only need to run migrate. So how do we run that command on Heroku? Well, there are two ways that we can do this. We can, if we want to run a command on Heroku, then we can use Heroku run. So for example, let me go back to my terminal here. And let me go ahead and clear the screen. So if we want to run a command on Heroku, we can say Heroku run. And now I can specify any command that I want to run on the shell of our Heroku. And that command will be run from the root of our application. So I could simply say Heroku run python manage.py migrate. So if I run that, then it's going to run python manage.py migrate on our Heroku machine. So that should have run our migrations for our application and created our tables. And if we scroll up here, we can see that it looks like that's what it did. We have a bunch of green marks here that said everything went okay. Okay, so now our tables should be created. Now, while we're at it, let's also create a super user that can log in to the admin panel. Remember, we're starting over with a new production database here. So our old one that we used in development, it no longer exists. We have to also create this on Heroku. Now, another way that we can run commands on Heroku is to actually run a bash shell from Heroku itself. So let me clear my screen here. Now, the way to do this is we can simply say Heroku run bash. And if I run Heroku run bash, then it should give me a bash shell to our Heroku machine. Okay, so now we're connected to our Heroku machine, and now we can run some commands. Since we'll actually be on the Heroku machine, we won't need to prepend the command with Heroku run anymore. Now, these Heroku machines are called dynos, and they are a Linux system. So you need to run Linux commands. So for example, if I run ls, then it lists the files and directories of the current directory, which is the root of our application. So we can run commands from here as well. So to create a super user, we can simply say python manage.py and create super user. So if I run that, then it's going to ask for a username and password and all of that good stuff. So I will make my username Corey MS, and then the email address. I will put in my email address, and now a password. I'll just put as testing321. Okay, so our super user was created successfully. And now to exit our Heroku machine, we can simply type exit. And now, once it exits out of there, we are now back on our local machine. Now that we're back on our local machine, now let's try running our website again, now that we should have created those tables and that super user. So I'm going to say Heroku open to open our website in the browser. And now it actually looks like we're getting somewhere. Let me resize this here to be a little smaller. So we can see our application is running here at myawesomedjangoapp.herokuapp.com. So this should be accessible to anyone on the internet at this point. Now, there currently aren't any posts because we created a new Postgres database for production. So let's test out some of the functionality of this site and see if everything is working. So let's try to log in with that super user that we just created. So the username there was Corey MS. The password was testing321. So if I log in, it looks like we logged in because we can access our profile and stuff like that. First, let's go to the admin panel and see if our admin site is working, and it is, so that's good. Let me try logging out as this user and going back to our site. Oh, that's trying to log back into the admin site. Let's try to create a new user. So I'll go to register. For the new username, I'll just say deployed user. For the email, I'll say du@test.com. Password as testing321. Testing321. Sign up. Okay. Looks like that user was created. Let's try to log in as that user. Okay, and that seemed to work. So now let's create some new posts here. So my first post with the content of my first post, and that seems to be working well. We are getting our images from Amazon S3 like we set up in the last video, so that is working well also. Let me create another post here and try to do some updates. So I'll create a post here, click on that, go to update and say my updated second post. That seems to work well. Let me try to delete that post. Okay, and that's working well also. That second post was deleted. So we're just kind of going through here and making sure that all this functionality is working correctly. Now, this is also why it's a good idea to have tests set up for your website so that you can just automate all of these tests, because doing this manually every time you make some updates takes a long time, as you can see. But I'm going to try to update a profile picture here. So it looks like our profile picture updated successfully, so that's good. And lastly, let's try to log out and see if it sends us an email. If we click on forgot password, if this looks like it sends us a reset password email. Okay, and we can see an email has been sent with instructions to reset your password. So that looks like it is working also. And I actually just saw that email pop up on my phone. So it does look like that email went through. Okay, so all of that seems to be working great. So now we've got our application deployed to Heroku. Now, when you're working with Django, Django has a deployment checklist on their website that you can look through to make sure that you did everything that you need to do when deploying applications. So let me actually search for this. So I will go to Django deployment checklist, and it should be the first result here. Okay, so this deployment checklist, it'll kind of tell you the things that you need to do. So for example, hiding your secret key, setting debug equal to false, So you're going to want to look through this deployment checklist and make sure that you did everything that you need to do when deploying applications. And this actually reminds me, so it's a good thing that we use this checklist. It actually reminds me that we didn't set debug equal to false yet. We just had it set to true while we were debugging our application. But now we need to set that equal to our environment variable. So to change that, let's go back to our settings.py file here. I'm going to scroll up to our debug. Now for our debug value here, we have to do something a bit different. So this has to be equal to a Boolean of true or false, but we can only get back strings from environment variables. So instead, I'm going to do a little trick to turn this into a Boolean. So if we use a conditional to test whether that environment variable is equal to the string of true, then it will return a Boolean of true or false. So let me just do this, and then I will explain what it's doing. So within some parentheses here, I'm going to say os.environ.get, and I'm going to get the environment variable, and we called that debug value. I'm pretty sure if I go back to my bash profile, I can check. Yeah, that is debug value, and that is set equal to the string of true. So we'll say if that environment variable of debug value is equal to the string of true. And if that debug value is equal to the string of true, then this entire conditional is going to return true, and that's what debug will be set to. So basically debug is going to be equal to false if the debug value environment variable is anything but true. So that'll work well. So now if we wanted to push that last change, then we could simply open up our terminal and do a git add -a of all of our changes and do a git commit with a message here. And I'll set that as a message of set debug value. And now you can push that to Heroku by saying git push Heroku master and run through that. Okay, so now we have our site deployed to Heroku. Now, if you just want to have your site accessible and don't care about having that Heroku domain name, then you could simply leave it like this and share that with anyone who you want to see your application. Now, if you want a custom domain name, then there is a bit more that we need to do, but I believe I'll save that for a future video if anyone is interested in seeing how that's done. So if that's something that you want to see, then just let me know. Now, there's also a lot more that we could learn about the Heroku platform itself and what all capabilities that are available to us. So for example, they have a great versioning system where it's easy to roll back if you ever make a mistake. So for example, let me just show a quick example here. If I was to do Heroku and run the releases command, then this will show us all of the deployments that we made in this video. And all of these have a version associated with the deployment. So we can see here that there is a v16 at the top, v15, v14. So if you pushed out a bad deployment and simply wanted to roll back to a stable version, then all you would have to do in that case is, so let me copy like v15 here. I could simply say something like Heroku rollback and then paste in v15. So if I were to run that command, which I'm not going to do because I don't want to actually roll that back, but that would take you back to that specific deployment automatically without any actual work on your end. So I think that those are great features. So if you're interested in learning more about Heroku, then I would highly recommend going through their documentation to see what all you can do with their service. Okay, so I think that is going to do it for this video. Hopefully now you have a good understanding for how you can push your Python application to Heroku. But if anyone has any questions about what we covered in this video, then feel free to ask in the comment section below, and I'll do my best to answer those. And if you enjoy these tutorials and would like to support them, then there are several ways you can do that. The easiest way is to simply like the video and give it a thumbs up, and also it's a huge help to share these videos with anyone who you think would find them useful. And if you have the means, you can contribute through Patreon, and there's a link to that page in the description section below. Be sure to subscribe for future videos, and thank you all for watching.